Bow our heads. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. So, do I have that on? Oh, there we go. So much technology. Oh my gosh. So, for the few weeks we've been looking at, on Sunday morning, the reading that's been assigned are readings from Paul's letter to the Romans. Last week, Romans 6 came up. This week it's part of Romans 7. Next 3 weeks, it's going to be parts from Romans 8, and then some later chapters of Romans, and then at some point we move on to another book. So that's the way we do things in this kind of season from May or June to November or December. We take an epistle or the Acts or Revelation or something and read excerpts kind of chapter by chapter. And Romans is a great thing to talk about because it is one of the most influential and important books in the whole Bible, I guess. And I mean, maybe, one of the most, a candidate for being the most influential on Christian theology and doctrine through the centuries. An example is that in the 16th century, Roman Catholics and Protestants separated, and a lot of that had to do with different views of the letter to the Romans. It's not that all Catholics believe the same thing and all Protestants believe the same thing, but the things that people argued about were things that Paul talks about in Romans. It was things like, what's the relation between faith in Christ and doing good works? What's baptism about? What's conversion about? What's the relation between church and state? All kinds of issues that became important, including what we'll talk more about today, which is why is it that sin prevents us from doing all that we want to do in Christ? So in Romans, the book of Romans, Romans 7 and 8 are particularly influential and contested, I guess, different interpretations. Romans 7, which we read from today, talks about ways in which we are kind of imprisoned by some force that keeps us from doing things that we know are right. And chapter 8 tells about a way out of that, the way in which grace helps us. So the issue today is why it's complicated to do the right thing. So this is our famous Donald Duck with the angel Donald Duck saying one thing and the demon Donald Duck saying another. And sometimes, if you're like me, I feel this going on in my mind as I'm making decisions. So, life it's about making moral decisions. I mean, we don't always think about it as moral decisions. We don't always agonize about it, maybe, but any decision we make is affirming the value of a goal, of some kind of end. Where a decision is to affirm that what we're deciding is a good thing to do. So there's some kind of moral thing in that. So there's all kinds of everyday stuff that we do, So where do we set the thermostat in our house, in a world of climate change? Are there products we want to boycott because of the morality of whoever produces it or because of the country that it comes from? I mean, these are issues that people think about sometimes, and they come to different conclusions. So it's not there's one kind of moral understanding of these things, but they're moral decisions. How do we spend our time and our money? Do we spend our time and our money on things that are fun entertainment but of no use to anybody? Or do we spend our time and money on things that will improve our life or make our family better off? Or do we spend our time and our money on the needy of the world? I don't know, earthquake victims in Venezuela or refugees in Sudan or whatever it might be. Those are kind of moral issues. And they're complicated. So I'm going to talk about a few reasons why they're complicated and then kind of hone in on the problem that Paul talks about. So the first reason that I'll give is, first of all, you need a moral compass. And the religions of the world, all of them, I'm told, I've seen evidence, this is true, have something like a golden rule, something like do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And then Christianity goes a bit further and it says, not only that, but actually love God with all your heart and your soul and your strength and your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So that's the kind of grounding of our sense of what it is to have a moral compass. But not everybody cottons on to that. Some people, their morality is really to act in their own self-interest, I guess, or to, if they run over people, they kind of think that's the way life is. Life's a battle, I guess. Life's harsh, life's raw. There's a column in today's Guardian newspaper that names 3 world leaders whose names you would recognize, and says what they have in common is that they all have a chronic inability to discern right from wrong. And you kind of think, yeah, these are people who are, made the political life very wealthy for themselves and don't mind doing damage to other people. So that's the first thing, to have a kind of a moral compass. And we get that, I think, from our faith. We get that from our upbringing, maybe, from our parents. We get that from, just the compassion, I think, that's built into a lot of human hearts. Maybe not all human hearts, but God intended it to be into all human hearts, but sometimes people lack it. Second, even if you have a moral compass, even if you want to do what's loving, even if you want to, do unto others what you would have them do unto you, life's complicated. Nothing's black and white. So you have you want to be loving, but often you find situations where you can't be loving to everybody in your life in the same way at the same time. So you make mistakes. And I think one of the ways you kind of grow in being an ethical person is to recognize your fallibility around moral decision making, and to recognize that you have made mistakes and look at those mistakes you've made and say, what might I have done better? Maybe in some situations you couldn't actually do better. It was just you were in a situation where there was no really right answer, and those are really tough. But they happen in life. But they're still, even if you wouldn't have done anything different, you can still maybe find something to learn from that situation. The third thing is we're sometimes tempted to let ourselves off the hook in ways that we wouldn't really let other people off the hook. So we might make a decision to kind of glide through a stop sign because, well, there's nobody around, or we don't think there's anybody around, and it's not going to, nobody's going to get hurt if we do. And or we might want to just take a little shortcut on some tax liability that we have, and it's only a few dollars, and the federal government can stand a loss of a few dollars. But there's a principle. The picture here is a famous German philosopher who had a moral system that was based on the fundamental principle that anything you do should be something that you would be okay on everybody in the world doing, as a universal rule. So you might be okay in going through a stop sign today, but you wouldn't want everybody in the world always going through stop signs. And you might see a reason why you might not pay all your taxes in a certain situation, but you don't want everybody in the country to, make the same decision, because that would. So you need to check your own temptation. It's complicated because you have to test your own temptation to let yourself get away with things. Okay, now, but we're going to get to what Paul is really talking about. So this is somebody who's thinking to himself, I should really exercise, because exercise is good for me. It'll make me, a healthier person, and probably make me a happier person, and probably improve my relationships, and probably improve the way I do my job, or whatever it is. Exercise is fun, I guess, but it's also, there's kind of a moral end involved in exercising as well. But the guy's only thinking about it. He can't really bring himself to do it. So this is where we get to what Kurt read a little earlier from the Epistle to the Romans. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. Now if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I that do it, but sin that dwells within me. So I find it to be a law that when I want to do what is good, evil lies close at hand. I delight in the law of God in my inmost self, but I see in my members another law at war with the law of my mind, making me captive to the law of sin. So sin is not a fashionable word, but what Paul's thinking of is although God created human nature good, there was a fall. and nature got corrupted, and so our corrupted human nature isn't always as good as God intended it to be. But we might think about it in terms of DNA, right? So we know that there's stuff in our DNA that can determine all kinds of things in our life, what toothpaste we prefer, or what music we listen to, what diseases we might wind up with, and there's ways in which we can adjust our lives to what is given to us in our DNA, but you can't just sort of will yourself not to have the DNA or to change it. I mean, maybe someday you'll be able to do that medically or something, but at this point anyway, and I'm not sure I would recommend that, but anyway, at this point, you can't just will away the human nature that you've got. So that's Paul's dilemma. What do we do about that? And then in Romans 8, he's going to have answers. But for now, we'll stick with Romans 7. So Romans 7, I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. I'm going to tell a story about one of my children. So my children grew up with two clergy parents, so they had a lot of sermon illustrations told about them in church, which they actually did not like all that much. So I will try to disguise which child this is of mine, and when it happened, and where it happened, and how it happened. But the general idea is this. I had a daughter who had a job, and the job involved doing certain tasks, and she was being paid to do the task. And one day she just couldn't bring herself to do the task. It wasn't that it was a hard task particularly, but it was sort of, I don't know, it was inert or, kind of somehow morally paralyzed or something. She just couldn't do it. But she still kind of accepted pay for it, and she got caught. So, and she genuinely felt terrible about it, not just because she got caught, but even when she was not doing the task she knew she should, she just felt terrible. She knew she was supposed to do it, but something in her she just couldn't bring herself to do it. So I thought, you got to know, certain child, whose name I won't give, certain child, you need to know that this is kind of a human condition. So I pulled out Romans 7, and I read this. And she was a Christian, and still is a Christian, but she's not exactly a student of the Bible, so she didn't know every word in the Bible exactly. And she was just surprised that this would speak to her across, almost 2,000 years from a religious point of view. I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. What is it in us, that makes that something we can all kind of identify with? So the state of Romans 7 is this state of being kind of trapped. The state of Romans 8 is going to be a kind of way in which God gives us grace to escape that trap. And Romans 7 and 8 are very contested for a number of reasons because of different things. I'll give you a short list, but I don't think I'm going to spend time. But these are some of the things that people argue about in Romans. But the one I particularly want to talk about is at number 3, is the Romans 7 state pre-conversion, post-conversion, or universal. In other words, once we find Christ, or once we recognize that Christ has found us, once we commit ourselves to Christ, and for adults, maybe we're getting baptized or whatever it might be, do we change? Do we put away the sinful stuff? Is that what Paul's saying? That once we find Christ, we no longer sin? Or does it mean that that all human nature, that there's nothing in human nature that the substantial stuff in human nature doesn't get changed? We learn something about holiness, we begin to grow in grace, we start a long period of growing in our discipleship, but it's not an immediate thing to be baptized and then be perfect. And here's somebody that made a difference in that discussion. In the early church, the first 2 or 3 centuries, if you were baptized and then committed a bad sin, you were out forever. And if you committed a kind of a smaller sin, a venial sin, then you were on probation for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years until you proved yourself able. There was a sense, that you make vows at baptism. You make vows that you're going to follow the Lord, and if you break the vow, why should you stay in church? You should be thrown out. You've broken the contract. Israel breaks its covenant from time to time, but then God always forgives, doesn't he? So that was what St. Augustine. So St. Augustine was the Western Christian theologian. He was an African, and his mother was a Berber. So he's pictured here as black. We often think of him as white, but he was dark-skinned, I'm sure. And he became a bishop in North Africa in the 390s, and then he wrote his Confessions, which I'm sure many of you have read or at least know about, in which he talks about his life. He talks about his regrets. He talks about things he did wrong. He grew up with a Christian mother and a kind of agnostic father. The mother really prayed for him and tried to get him to be a Christian, and he looked into it, but a lot of things he didn't like about it, and he did a lot of bad things. He, as a teenager, he hung around with a kind of a bad crowd of rowdy boys. As a kid, he stole something from his neighbor's yard. He lied to his mother at a significant point in their life together. He became, infatuated with some religious fad and became very arrogant, and opinionated about it, which he was very ashamed of when he wrote this. And all kinds of things. He just talks about all these things that he did wrong. So there's 13 long chapters in the book, and they're called books. So the book has 13 books, so to speak. The first 9 books are all about, the mistakes he made on the way and wrestling with Christianity. And finally, he decides, I want to be a Christian. And he goes and he gets baptized. And then in book 10, he's supposed to say, and then I became a good person. But instead, in book 10, he lists all the ways in which he's still sinful, tempted by things he shouldn't be tempted about, given to idle curiosity. He's proud. He covets praise and admiration. He does the good things sometimes, but maybe he's doing the good things for the wrong reason, maybe because he wants praise. And people read this at the time and said, this is outrageous. This is someone who has found Christ, made a commitment, taken vows, and then he goes off and he's bragging sort of about being a sinner. And not only that, he's a bishop. Bishops are supposed to be models of something good. And here he is, he's modeling being a sinner. What's that about? But Augustine thought that, being baptized, you get some water on your skin and you can wash off some surface dirt, but you're not changing the stuff under the skin. You still got your personality, you still got your character, you still got your human being. You're going to work on it through your life, and you're going to try to minimize the bad stuff and maximize the good stuff, but it takes time and effort and prayer and effort, So all this was rediscovered in the 16th century by Martin Luther, and Martin Luther's famous thing was justification by faith alone. And what that meant was we are not really just after we're Christian. We still sin, but Christ embraces us as if we were not sinners, as if we were just, and asks us to do better, but doesn't reject us. So at the same time, just and a sinner was how we put it. So we're baptized, we're committed to Christ, but if we start hoping for Christian perfection, we're going to be really disappointed because that's not going to happen. Christian improvement? Yeah, I think so. Although it's got ups and downs, it's not a linear thing where you're always going up and up and up and getting better and better. But the progress is there. So finally, what might mean for us, there's an order in the Roman Catholic Church called the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order. The last pope was a Jesuit, and they came out about the same time as Martin Luther. And although I began by saying that Roman Catholics and Protestants disagreed about things in the 16th century, there's actually a lot of overlap in what they said. And the founder of the Jesuits, Ignatius of Loyola, asked his followers every night to do the examen, is what it's called in English. I suppose it sounds like it should be examen or something like that, but it's pronounced examen in English. Every night, before you go to bed, you think about the day that you've just had, and you thank God for the gifts that it's given you. But you also recognize candidly that you didn't do everything you should have. You have regrets, you committed sins, and you bring those before the Lord, and in your own heart, you got to be really candid about it, because we're all tempted to kind of make excuses for ourselves, but you're candid that I really let God down on this one, and then you pray for grace for the next morning. Not a bad way, You know, it doesn't take a huge amount of time in the evening, but not a bad way to end the day, just in kind of our evening prayers to just, maybe you already do it, maybe it's kind of obvious, but look over the day and give thanks where thanks are due. Ask forgiveness where forgiveness should be asked, and look forward to grace in the next day. So for that opportunity to be forgiven, for that opportunity to recognize where we fall short and to improve, and not because we want to be perfect, but just because we want to be better disciples. Thanks be to God.